Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to see folks joining, even though we cannot actually see you. We welcome you and really are thrilled to have you join us this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from, to participate in what we hope is going to be a really dynamic and timely conversation focused on the DOJ's recent focus on criminal enforcement in Central America. We have a panel of experts from Central America and from the United States who are going to tell us from a local perception what the reactions have been to the US announcements recently, and also the state of play of any corruption efforts and compliance trends in their countries. Before we get started, I do want to introduce our panel. We'll start with Juan Carlos Tristan, who is a partner at BLP. He's based in the San Jose office. Juan Carlos has extensive experience in compliance and anti-corruption, which includes internal investigations, trainings, implementation of ethics and anti-corruption programs across Central America and Mexico, based on international standards, domestic laws, and the FCPA. Juan Carlos currently holds a position of president of the Anti-Corruption Commission of the Costa Rican chapter of the International Chamber of Commerce. And in addition, he's the member of the Ibero-American Group of Compliance Lawyers and is a founding member and board member of the Costa Rica chapter of the World Compliance Association. And on top of that is country representative of the Anti-Corruption Commission of the IBA. So certainly keeping busy in this space. And Juan Carlos will be speaking primarily about events in Costa Rica. We're also happy to welcome Vanessa Oquelí de Riera, who's the managing partner of Garcia Modang in Honduras. Her practice focuses primarily on corporate, commercial, financial, aeronautical, energy, and tax law. And over the years, Vanessa has participated in some of the largest and unprecedented transactions in Honduras, including issuance of sovereign bonds, credit guarantees for the Republic of Honduras. She also advises companies across different industries on compliance-related matters, and most recently participated as a member of a committee of the Honduras American Chamber of Commerce for an FCPA matter including involving the banking sector. So welcome, Vanessa. It's a pleasure to have you. Jose Quiñones, who joins us from Guatemala, is head of the Alta Quil Cuatro compliance practice. He actively advises corporations in implementing effective compliance and governance programs and leads a team of experts that provide assessment, consulting, and training on compliance matters. Jose has participated in ISO committees on anti-bribery, sustainable procurement, compliance, and governance, and leads a nonprofit organization anti-corruption section. His extensive local and international experience advising foreign financial institutions, primarily in structured finance deals, bind offerings, and international capital markets, cross-border transactions, mergers and acquisition, and complex project finance deals. So welcome to Jose. It's a pleasure to have you here. And of course, it's my pleasure to introduce my colleague and friend, Matt Ellis, who is a member in Miller and Chevalier's international department. Matt is no stranger to Latin America. He has lived and practiced extensively in the area, particularly on all aspects of FCPA compliance and enforcement. Matt is trilingual, being fluent in Spanish and Portuguese, and is a frequent speaker on matters involving Mexico, Brazil, Colombia, Argentina, and other Latin American markets. And of course, I'd be remiss to note that Matt is also my co-host in the Hola Compliance podcast, which I hope you will all subscribe to, where we cover in Spanish developments in anti-corruption and compliance in Latin America. I'm Alejandra Montenegro Almonte, a partner with Matt at Miller and Chevalier, and will be moderating this discussion today. So without further ado, if we can get to the substance of our discussion today, of course, the genesis behind the idea behind this webinar was really launched by the recent developments that we've seen from the Biden administration focused on anti-corruption. And really what drew our attention was the specific emphasis that the Biden administration has placed on Central America, which has often been viewed as a flyover region, right? Stop in Mexico, go to Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, in this area. And, I'm going to predict that's the case no more. I think we're all expecting to see increased focus on enforcement and compliance beyond what we're already seeing. Of course, on June 3rd, President Biden issued a memorandum establishing the fight against corruption as a core U.S. national interest, a national security interest. And without going into too much detail, but to frame this discussion, that memorandum by elevating corruption again as a national security interest, focuses national agencies to develop a strategy to bolster the capacity not just of domestic institutions in the US, so expecting to see more cooperation outside of the DOJ and SEC with other enforcement agencies focused on organized crime, including corruption, but also international institutions and multilateral bodies that are focused on corruption, money laundering, illicit financing, to increase transparency. And a large emphasis in the memorandum, of course, is a focus on the demand side of corruption. So President Biden challenges his administration to develop a strategy that's going to focus on foreign leaders, foreign state-owned and affiliated enterprises that are demanding and contributing to corruption in their countries. On June 7th, of course, the U.S. Attorney General Garland announced an initiative establishing Joint Task Force Alpha, which brings together U.S. enforcement agencies to focus on Mexico and the Northern Triangle of Central America, which is the countries that we have represented here today. And then, of course, Vice President Harris chose Guatemala as the platform from which to announce the creation of the Anti-Corruption Task Force that will bring together U.S. agencies to conduct investigations and train local law enforcement in conducting their own investigations in country. So we'll look forward to dynamic conversation on these issues, feedback from our regional experts on what they're hearing from clients and their own governments in reaction to these statements. But I'd like to first start, Matt, with you. If you can think about the region as a whole, if you can talk to us a little bit, parting from in Miller and Chevalier's 2020 anti-corruption survey, on what trends we're seeing in terms of anti-corruption perceptions, but also compliance trends. Matt, if you could speak to us a bit about that.
Certainly. Thank you, Alejandra. And before doing that, I just want to make sure the audience recognizes that we are lucky to have Alejandra leading this panel long before the US government and others were focused on Central America. She's been working, focusing, representing some of the most important companies from the region, and she's also from the region. So we're lucky to have you steering the ship in this webinar. And we're lucky, just to echo what she said, these panelists are some of the best anti-corruption attorneys in the region. So to have their perspective is going to be incredibly valuable. My job is to focus on the data and what the data says. And I think as a contextual point, and just to recap Alejandra's points, I mean, look, Central America, there is a lot happening. National security focus, trade opportunities with free trade agreements, heightened corruption risk, and now this integrated cooperative investigation approach that, our client base is curious about what's next. What the data is showing is the following. Miller and Chevalier last year, as we've done since 2008, partnered with the law firms represented on this webinar, as well as 11 other law firms in the region, to gauge the perceptions of business people in the region related to corruption. And we weren't just talking with multinationals who are on the ground. We were talking about local companies, medium-sized companies, the multilatinas, and getting those perceptions. Almost 1,000 people were surveyed last year. And what became clear very quickly when reviewing the data is that Central America stands apart in two ways. First, in perceived corruption risk, right? And when you look at perceptions of lost business to competitors who are willing to pay bribes, on average across the region, about 47% of respondents say, yes, we've lost business to competitors who are willing to pay bribes. You look at Central America and those numbers dramatically go up. 69% of respondents from Honduras, Panama, 59%. So, I think as a whole, the region perceives the frequency of corruption. And given that point, it's going to be very interesting to hear from our panelists about what are the implications, right, for companies doing business there? How does corruption risk manifest itself? What are best practices, unique approaches to addressing it? The second data point I wanted to share, and then I'll pass it back to you, Alejandra, is perceptions from respondents related to the effectiveness of their own local anti-corruption laws. And region-wide, 72% of respondents do not think their local laws are effective in this area. When you look at Central America, those numbers are even higher. Again, 83%, Honduras, 69, I'm sorry, 80%, Panama. So again, for purposes of this conversation, an interesting issue for the panel to address is, given that local business people perceive local anti-corruption laws as so ineffective, what are the prospects for this vision that the US government has laid out of cooperation, of task forces, et cetera? So I'll leave it there. Alejandro, I'll pass it back over to you, but hopefully that set the stage for the discussion.
That set the stage perfectly, Matt. Thank you for that. And that really is the threshold question that we see here, right? Is given the recent announcements and the increased focus on cooperation with Central America. Juan Carlos, we'll start with you. But if you can tell us a bit about, Costa Rica has been a leader in Central America in this space. So a bit of the state of play of anti-corruption enforcement and legislation in Costa Rica. Many people might have heard about the recent anti-corruption scandal that has broken out. So hopefully you'll be able to paint a clearer picture on the genesis and nature of that issue. But give us, where are we in Costa Rica, and to the extent that you've seen reactions to Biden's comments, what have they been?
Okay, thank you, Alejandra and Matt. And good morning to everybody. It's always a pleasure sharing panels with you, and I believe that our topic, the compliance and the anti-bribery topics, are hotter than ever in Central American region. Not because we've been out of these type of problems, but we've been out of the scope, at least, of the U.S. authorities overall. I believe now this is getting hotter and hotter, and I believe that we have a lot of new things to report in each of our countries. It's funny because you were talking about Costa Rica, about a country that has always been one step ahead in terms of this. And I believe that if you see the statistics of the corruption perception index, we are indeed one step ahead of our neighboring countries. But I believe the situation has drastically changed in the last 1 or 2 weeks, as I would further explain today. I was laughing this morning because when I was preparing my panel, I was first thinking that when you first called me on, it was on June 8th, which was the day actually after the Biden announcement, or the DOJ announcement, and everything was so calm here, and we were just focusing our conversation on the North Triangle and what was going on in Nicaragua, which is a different creature. And now, since June 13, when this whole new entire corruption situation exploded in Costa Rica, I believe so. My talking points are completely different from what I planned back in June 8th. Just to give you a very summarized version of the legal framework here, just to start what you first asked. I believe that the fact that we've been one step ahead is that since 2004, we have a very specialized anti-corruption law that was enacted as a response to a big corruption scandal back in early 2000s, when 2 former presidents ended up in prison. Then recently, in the last 2 or 3 years, Costa Rica started the process to enter into the OECD, which we finally concluded a few months ago. And a couple of years ago, we approved it was approved for us to join the anti-bribery convention of the OECD. As you know, this involved the enactment of several laws in terms of transparency and in terms of anti-corruption, which makes probably the most relevant addition to our legal framework has been the recent enactment of the law, which imposes criminal liability to entities, to either Costa Rican entities or even to foreign holding companies for corruption cases in Costa Rica, and also imposes multi-million-dollar economic fines, and imposes like some fines even involving the dissolution of the entities, depending on the complexity of the things involved. So I believe that our framework has expanded. I believe that our prosecutor capacities has been expanded, and I believe our enforcement capacity has been expanded. In the past 5 years, the number of complaints against the anti-corruption prosecutor office increased by 5. And I believe, as Matt was saying, our perception of corruption in Costa Rica, it's quite well. And I believe there is a lot of trust in our judicial system, which provides a very stable social and legal environment, which at the same time protects the or promotes the foreign investment in Costa Rica. But as I was saying before, and I don't want to talk a lot about this, but on June 14th, we early in the morning, our investigatory authorities, the OIJ, carried out 55 raids, including one raid at the presidential office, which ended up with the detention of with 30 arrests of people who are still under arrest, waiting for precautionary measures being imposed, which was related with this scheme that was investigated from 2018 until today, in connection with apparently the main construction companies of the country, offering bribes and properties, assets, luxury vehicles, and even sexual favors to government officials in exchange of the special treatment in securing some government contracts of our main infrastructure projects. Also today in the morning, our antitrust authorities initiated an investigation against the two main infrastructure construction companies for an antitrust illegal conducts, in which both companies were also kind of distributed between the two of them all the contracts with the government for the main infrastructure projects in Costa Rica. So this is, as you may see, as you may know, that the media it's in shock. Everybody's in shock. This is kind of the things that everybody was talking about, but we didn't know that it was coming. They say that between 2018 and 2020, government officials misappropriated around $125 million in bribes. And one of the things that are kind of different from this case from the other we've seen is that the prosecutor and the investigatory authorities focus this crime as this scheme as an organized crime scheme, which means that their investigation capacities are much more broader, and they can dig more, and they can dig easier, and they can also place precautionary measures over these individuals pretty easy, as they can seize assets, they can freeze bank accounts, among others. So we are all expecting. There are a lot of things going on. We have the people who deal with these companies asking around what's going on. So it's going to be a very pretty busy few months going forward. So I believe that even though we haven't heard that much about Biden's announcement, because it was certainly focused more in the North Triangle, I believe that we have also our own scandal right now, besides of Biden, going on in the country, which you will probably expect more news in the coming future. And thank you again for the invitation, Alejandra and Matt.
No, thank you so much, Juan Carlos. And, it's fascinating. We hear you talk about this caso Conchinilla, as it's, locally referred to.
Which is an awful name, by the way.
I know.
That was why they put that awful name.
I know. Well, it's an awful situation, right? Maybe that's what they were trying to evoke. And, it's interesting, the timing, as you noted, right after the Biden announcement. And yet this investigation is scoped beyond anti-corruption, as you've noted, right? Broader organized crime elements. And of course, as we've seen in other countries, industry focus here is construction, which should shine a light on companies in that industry or tangentially related to the industry to perhaps start dusting off, right? Maybe kicking the tires a little bit as this investigation evolves, to determine whether or not there could be implications for your own company. and individuals involved. So thank you so much, Juan Carlos, for that. And we'll be tracking that very closely.
Alejandra, can I add to that point real quick?
Of course, please.
Just, I don't want to miss the opportunity to say, I think there's a practical effect of the Biden administration's focus on Central America, which is, U.S. prosecutors will more likely pick up on reports of local investigations, media reports of potential wrongdoing. That's always a source of FCPA cases. And the fact that more eyes and ears are on the ground, are focused on Central America now, increases, at least from my own perspective, the potential of U.S. involvement in those types of issues.
I think that's absolutely right, Matt. And the opportunity to really start testing compliance programs, making sure that they're working, right? Not just looking backward, but also looking forward to ensure that the areas of risk that this investigation highlights for the industry are addressed in your own company's programs. And please do all feel welcome to interject and comment. The more fluid the conversation, the better. And to our participants, I did neglect to say at the beginning, there is a Q&A function on Zoom, and we do invite you to please put in any questions that you may have for our panelists, and we'll be sure to be tracking that and address them as they arise. So turning now to El Salvador, Vanessa, if you can share with us some developments in any corruption and compliance efforts in El Salvador. And, one area of particular interest to me was El Salvador's recent announcement that it may be pulling out of its anti-corruption accord with the OAS, which, again, is within the same weeks as the Biden administration is increasing a focus. We see El Salvador take the step out for, interesting reasons related to, in fact, corruption. But maybe you can tell us a little bit about that. Again, the state of play of anti-corruption enforcement and compliance in El Salvador, and what our participants and companies and investors should bear in mind if they have operations in El Salvador.
Thank you, Alejandra, and thank you, Matt. First of all, I want to congratulate you, just for taking the time and putting together the whole survey. I know it's a lot of work, and for you guys that put it all together. And I think it's a very good perspective that we can all get out of it, just to know how our peer countries are in Latin America. And of course, maybe to our country, it's not amazing, what the results are, unfortunately, and some of them, like corruption issues. But it's always good to have like that benchmarking. And well, Juan Carlos, I must say that we always look up to Costa Rica in those issues, because there is a huge difference on implementation in Costa Rica rather than in other countries. And well, I don't know why, but it's been like that historically. So let's just hope we can move forward as quickly and as good as Costa Rica has been doing in anti-corruption issues. As per El Salvador, I would like to take one of the phrases you used in the survey, which I think that just El Salvador pulling out of the OAS accord is maybe one step back, 2 steps forward, because I know the survey itself shows percentages of corruption in El Salvador, and of course there is no trust in the judicial power, etc. But there's one reality. Up to this date, there's been like 3 presidents, I think, and I'm comparing it with Honduras, where I live. And I mean, there's no one in Honduras that has been prosecuted or, it's in jail until maybe recently somebody related to the government. So I think that, there are several things that need to be taken in consideration, just such as that. Of course, it was not a good news to hear, of the withdrawal of that agreement. However, the president has mentioned in several occasions that they're looking for a different commission that might help, with the implementation of, anti-corruption issues. In general, I must say, like in our countries, the news that the United States was going to focus on corruption in the Northern Triangle specifically, it's always good news. It's very well seen because, talking a little bit on how effective corruption laws are in our country, unfortunately, they're not. I always say that we have a lot of good laws, But if, they're not enforced, then at the end, there's no purpose in it. So, I mean, there are several enforcements that have been made through, help from the United States, and being that, the United States itself is one of the main business partners for our country, specifically for El Salvador and Honduras. This type of news it's very, we're looking forward to whatever this, has to provide in the future as per the enforcement of local laws.
The point that you raised, Vanessa, on trade, the trade implications, right? U.S. being a trade partner, a business partner, is an interesting element here. That it's helpful to understand how that might shape country perspectives. And I know, Matt, that's something that you and I had chatted about. Was that this? Yes, it's a national security interest, but there are also some underpinnings of just trade relations potentially there as well.
Well, and in that regard, it is very important to know that, as business partners, and I guess that going back again to the results of the survey, there is so much like, knowledge of FCPA rules in Central America, because, companies, before they go to our countries, what they look for is somebody that, has knowledge of and that can comply with all the FCPA rules, knowing that maybe locally they will not be able to enforce, anti-corruption laws. And that is why, our companies in Central America are being trained in order to know more about FCPA rules. Of course, it's business. We are interested in our, companies and clients coming back to our countries and just, having some certain, of certainty on legal issues that are going to happen in our country. So even though, and I know it sounds a little bit contradictory, but even though, local laws don't apply, normally with business partners as, companies or multi-Latinas, as Matt was mentioning, and, companies from the US, there's a lot of, anti-corruption issues that can be covered through compliance with foreign rules rather than local rules.
That's great perspective. Thank you so much, Vanessa, for those comments. And we'll come back to you in Honduras in just a minute. But first, we're going to stop over in Guatemala to you, Jose. If, Guatemala seemed to really be making some important headway in its fight against corruption, right? CICIG was an anti-corruption commission that was instrumental in partnering with local enforcement in corruption investigations that reached, of course, I don't have to tell you, or even the highest ranking levels of government and officials. Now, CICIG left in 2019, but there still seems to be, similar to the president in El Salvador, at least an announcement that there might be a national anti-corruption commission formed, promising to take a hard line on organized crime in Guatemala. So can you walk us through, what you've observed in terms of legislative developments, compliance efforts in Guatemala? Just paint the landscape, if you will.
Thank you, Alejandra, and thank you, everybody. Good morning to everybody. Let me. I would think that it would make sense to take a few moments to try to understand what really happened to the UN-sponsored commission, the CICIG commission, because I think that overall, what I think is important to understand is that corruption is one of those wicked problems. Wicked as in the fact that it involves many variables, more than just enforcement, I would say. And sometimes this is just misunderstood. I think social, political, economic, and cultural issues are really important. And sometimes the fact that all efforts are involved in prosecution itself is part of the problem, I would say, and not the solution. The UN Commission started gaining a lot of momentum, I would say. It uncovered at the highest level in the country cases of abuse of power and rampant corruption. And at some point in time, it enjoyed a wide-ranging support. But keeping a commission with foreign prosecutors, foreign involvement, it sometimes starts moving away from the cultural aspects, understanding what the real source of the problems are. And I think that the first encounter, I think, with a difficulty was when they realized that enforcing the cases that they were investigating was not going to be that easy inside of a judicial system that was close to being collapsed. So that I would say was the first problem. They tried to force and threaten the judicial system, and that created some tension. I think that's the first hurdle, the main hurdle, and then it started spiraling when they realized that because prosecution was so hard, that constitutional reform was needed, and there was a proposal for constitutional reform, which I think had some backing from the general public, but some issues were introduced, such as backing indigenous populations, legal systems, and that created discomfort. And I would say that that's the second hurdle, and that it's probably what created a downward spiral of trust. Afterwards, some cases started, lighter cases against the son of a president, for example, for a case of already $30,000 of graft in some gifts in a public registry. And people started questioning what the real motives were. Was this looking to really fight the organized crime itself, or was it somewhat of a political effort? So that I believe created some pushback from many sectors, and I would say that created a polarized climate, which we're still on, and I think it is a hurdle in continuing the corruption fight. With that said, I would say that what has been happening is that corruption has now focused instead of a generalized effort, more of focusing on what I would say would be superheroes, certain individuals who continue the fight against corruption inside of public institutions, but it's not perceived as a generalized effort. And I would say that's very hard to keep up with, even though they're doing, I would say, generally holding a very difficult position and doing a general good job, I would say. It's hard to maintain sustainability in a system that relies on certain individuals, on key individuals, instead of a system. So not focusing on the system and the cultural aspects, I would say that has been a challenge. But I think on the positive side, there is, I think, very an exponential growth probably on compliance awareness. I think companies are very focused on trying to at least stay away from the judicial system and also protect themselves from reputational risk. So I think that even though there's those many challenges that I pointed out, there has been a lot of awareness, and people are moving shrewdly, trying to protect themselves from these types of corruption risks. So the other thing that I think is important to note is that we've seen a lot of pressure that is probably coming before the memo. I think many people saw this coming, and there's been a lot of cooperation between the DOJ and special international prosecutor's office here, and I've seen a few cases where attachments for international cases are immediately responded to locally. So I would say that that has also been a very positive advanced. And the other thing is that there are a lot of efforts that although they're scattered, people are really moving forward into implementing certain protections, governance protections in the corporations. And there are many efforts right now internationally that we are involved in, including the fact that people are working on ISO new standards on maturity models for governance and anti-corruption, and I think that people are just trying to keep up with international practices, and that has stepped up I would say not only the awareness, but the at least for formal businesses, people are really more focused and getting into technical issues regarding how they're protecting their companies. So I would say that that's also been a positive side on this additional enhanced awareness on anti-corruption issues. I would leave it at that, Alejandro. If there's any questions regarding just how the process has evolved, I will leave it to you.
Sure. No, I mean, I think that the comments that you raise are really very encouraging, Jose. And I love your term, superheroes really taking on the fight to fight any corruption. I think both as external practitioners and in-house compliance folks and legal folks, very often you do feel like you have to have superhero powers to affect change in this space. And in visits to Guatemala, we have seen some of what you're telling us, right? Where companies really are taking on the word tomando la batuta comes to mind in Spanish, but like really just taking up the flag of compliance and implementing programs, whether or not required by local legislation. Are you also seeing grassroots? So I guess the question is, the superhero forces that you're seeing, are they emerging within specific industries, business, the business area at large, or are there more grassroots efforts that you think are taking hold and influencing these issues?
Super, but yes, and I would say that well, I forgot to mention that the government itself created as an effort to try to move forward from the non-renewal of the UN-sponsored commission. It created its own commission, and that has, I would say, provided what I would call poor results. I mean, the structure itself is it has no foundations. There is no generalized effort to actually attack corruption from the inside, from excessive bureaucratic requirements, the process of the bidding process itself, the fact that only, for example, 18% of government spending is done through a web platform here that's called Guatecompras. There's many things you can do, and I was reading a question somebody posted that there's trying to insist on the same solutions for some things that have not worked in the past would definitely fall into the definition of insanity. I would say that what has been missing is what I'm pointing out is just a general lack of trust and feeling of that this solution has come from the inside. And I think it's working from the fact that the companies, as you mentioned, Alejandra, are concerned about this. It's not only legal risk that is involved, it's reputational and it's sustainability as well. Companies are valued on the possibility of keeping their revenues for a certain outlook in time. So there is concern on companies, and so corruption is just if you're basing your business model on the fact that you're obtaining licenses, for example, on the graft, your risk, the whole model of your business is risky. and you're eventually facing either a potential investigation if there is one, but even if there isn't, if you're putting your company for sale, you find a very tough M&A process when you get due diligence and people say, well, it's not normal to obtain such a license in such a short amount of time, or you miss some of the steps that are required by law, for example, or there are accusations that these licenses were obtained under corruption on Congress, for example. So if you're putting your business at risk, so it's not only if your only focus is prosecution, I would say we're missing the point that this needs to come from inside and actually fix the system instead of just attacking the symptoms.
Could not agree with you more. And it's, it's always encouraging to see more and more jurisdictions really internalize the business value of compliance and not just the fear of enforcement. So that leaves Honduras, Vanessa, and thank you for your comments, Jose. Wonderful. Vanessa, for Honduras, it's been an interesting couple of years, I think, outside looking in for Honduras, right? Similar to what we saw in Guatemala and El Salvador, Honduras did have an OAS mission focused on the fight against corruption. Negotiations around that renewal fell apart last year, and the commission then dissolved. And really be interested to hear on the new penal code that was passed in Honduras, which of course included elements of corruption there. What can you tell us about the current state of corruption in Honduras? And I'll start the group thinking as we go into the kind of the last closing questions on what the state of play in each of your countries, and particularly in Honduras for now, Vanessa, how the current state will affect cooperation and coordination that we see announced with the United States.
Thank you once again, Alejandra. Unfortunately, there's always news in Honduras regarding corruption. There's always something new. I mean, if it's not, whatever it's trending, it's happening in Honduras. And I mean, if it's vaccine, there's corruption regarding vaccine. If there's hospitals you need, it's corruption regarding hospitals. So, however, as I mentioned when I was talking a little bit about El Salvador, I do think we have very good laws. The problem is that there is no trust in the judicial system. And of course, there's no trust in the executive power and the whole bureaucracy, which, it's part of a government, but the whole bureaucracy, it's just lined up with unfortunately, corruption in different stages. So, as per, a business perspective, I must say that how have we, tried to, manage this in regards with our clients? And I'm sorry, just going back a little bit in order to directly answer your question. Yes, the OAS negotiation for the establishment of the new commission, it failed, and there was a national commission, Consejo Nacional Anticorrupción, and actually it had a very good acceptance from the public because they did point out a lot of things. The problem is that then again, in order to enforce anything that they find out, it had to go through local authorities. So everything basically ended there. So once again, I must say that this corruption in our country, there's no, I mean, we cannot lie about it. Of course, it has affected maybe many businesses because some others are, in a better position due to, corruption practices. But particularly in Honduras, there's a lot of FCPA enforcement. Like even with, business, which is the most common business partner again, but, even with the United Kingdom Bribery Act, or we're talking about Brazil regarding, corruption policies that are enforced in Brazil. So, how we have tried to manage this is just, trying to comply with international laws in order to give clients, a better perspective of what doing business in Honduras would be. Also, which is kind of contradictory, but they have modified several laws in Honduras, which in order to protect investments, there are some laws, and just to mention an example, for example, a distribution law. Formerly, you could only go, to a court in Honduras regarding distribution contracts, but that law was modified, and now you can, have a foreign jurisdiction as part of the contract and use foreign courts or arbitration, etc. And that's the same case with, other type of contracts. So in that regard, we had advanced a little bit, just, trying to see other options in other, to try to fight corruption. So, if I would answer the initial questions that Matt mentioned in his when he was explaining, the results of the survey on how effective local and anti-corruption laws are, I must say in Honduras we have very good laws. Unfortunately, there's no trust in the judicial system. So the answer would be that they are not effective in that regard. And we, through, history in the last years, we have had very positive results of, for example, the United States enforcing several laws. As you may know, that FIFA scandal that was many years ago, but there was, a very important politician that was not a president anymore, but he was never found, guilty of any anti-corruption acts in Honduras, even though, he was commonly known for that. And he was sentenced in the United States. That's the case of a family member of the current president of Honduras. So, when there's news regarding, enforcement of laws by the United States and just, help in that regard, it is actually, very, it has a very good acceptance. You always will have, two sides for it, regarding, the sovereign of a country, and if somebody else has to enforce laws. But, those two sides will always be there. And I particularly think that the general perspective or the expectations of this are very positive in the country.
Fantastic, Vanessa. Thank you so much for that breadth of information for Honduras. It's very, very helpful, I think, for this discussion. And well, I actually want to turn now. We have some questions coming in through the chat, and I appreciate everyone that's asking. I see the first question, Jose, you've already answered through the chat. Hi, Oscar, comes to us from Oscar Arroyo, and it's an interesting question that I think, if other panelists have comments. He says, it was Albert Einstein who said, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. None of these international anti-corruption commissions have worked anywhere in the world. Corruption is a symptom, not a disease itself. The cause of corruption rests in the exercise of governmental or bureaucratic discretion. And the question for the panel is, any efforts in that direction in any of your countries? And Jose, you've taken up the mantle here in the chat, where you refer to corruption as one of those wicked problems that involves many variables falling into a gray area. Do you want to expand on the written comments for folks who or anyone else on the panel?
I would just say that looking at from a business perspective, I mean, there's, if you're starting an effort with a new venture for, let's say, an extractive industry, you would need permits, you would need cooperation from municipalities, you would need registrations from tax offices. I mean, there's many points of contact with potential corruption issues that you need to be aware of. But you also need to be aware of that many of the institutions have been accustomed, for example, to a meeting in person with the local mayor, to holding Christmas parties. I mean, this is a culture already. So I'm not saying that that's acceptable, but I'm just saying you need to be aware of it, because if you're thinking of starting a new operation and not dealing with those issues in a smart and a professional way, then you're looking at some other type of risk. You'll be stuck probably with licenses that will never be authorized. And so that needs to be dealt with, and just looking at as I mentioned this as the only solution, looking at it from the prosecutor's point of view, you're missing out that you need to provide a solution for these emerging economies where there needs to be different types of ways of collaborating, for example, with a local municipality without making it a corruption effort. So I think there needs to be changes in laws, cultural changes, education for public officials, and this needs to be a joint effort. If it's not a joint effort and we're only prosecuting, then I mean, if somebody mentioned there as a question, is CICIG a model for dealing with money laundering and drug trafficking? It's the same issue. It's difficult to actually just try to enforce if you're not looking at the whole problem, consumption of drugs, money laundering. It needs to be a joint effort, and if it's not done that way, then you're facing probably a potential larger risk.
I think that's right on point. And Vanessa, I see your hand too.
Thank
You wanted to add
Alejandra.
comments on this.
And it's my intervention is going to be very short. I completely agree with Jose, but I just wanted to say, and I must, say that I'm saying this on my opinion, not regarding, the firm, but I agree with Oscar, who posted, the question regarding that it's something internal. Of course, when I mentioned, all the help that we get, from foreign countries as the United States, it's always welcome. I do agree that this is something that has to change internally. And I always use a phrase in Spanish, which says, los países tienen los gobernantes que se merecen, like countries have like the, the authorities that they deserve. So if we don't get to a point in we really choose the authorities that are going to be there, guiding us, then there's not going to be any change.
That's a very appropriate phrase, I think, Vanessa. There's two more questions. One is the question, Jose, that you were just referring to, and maybe we can get other perspectives on this as well, which is the question is from Kenneth Ray. Hello, thank you for joining us. What are panelists' views around the impact of drug trafficking and organized crime on the capacity of Central American countries to create effective local anti-corruption enforcement? And in particular, is a CICIG-style externally driven model a better way to prevent drug trafficking, organized crime for corrupting, manipulating local institutions? And I guess this one's interesting to me because drug trafficking and the type of organized crime that Kenneth is raising here really at its roots, sure, there's overlaps with corruption, but at its roots can be very different. And so I wonder if that difference calls for a different view and approach in attacking this type of crime.
Yeah, I believe, Alejandra, that I completely agree with you, and I believe it's hard to tell if that type of cooperation, and I believe that there was another question posted there in that similar sense, it's required or not. I believe that's part of the we are very our expectations are very high on this Cochinilla case, because which as I told you is an organized crime investigation, because everybody is hoping that the government did a decent investigation and that they have a decent case in front of them, because they've been mounting this strong case seemingly solid evidence and without any independent support from any international bodies. So this is kind of and we've always tried to be independent in that side. So this is kind of, we are in the final test right now, and we're all hesitating whether or not this is the right path or not.
Mm-hmm. I think that's something that we'll contend with for a while. Vanessa, did you have your hand raised on this point too? No? Okay. So I think that brings us really to the last question that's asked, and really goes to the heart of what our focus for this webinar is. And I think I'm going to ask, the panelists, all of you, to take out your crystal ball, right? And the question, I like the way it was phrased, so I'll go with it, is what is the real probability of country and institutional level country or institutional level cooperation, particularly where institutions may not be so strong? So what's the probability of cooperation between that and US investigations or initiatives as we look forward kind of on the wake of the Biden announcements? And then also if you can just give us, your predictions there and just some of the key takeaways based on your conversation today. Matt, why don't we start with you, and then we'll just go around the horn.
Wow. Well, I will, I really look to the regional specialists. I mean, from our perspective, Alejandra, I mean, and certainly as a key component of the new policies that are coming out of the Biden administration, there will be a keen focus on leveraging that cooperation with local authorities. What does that mean in practice? And what does it mean when the US government decides to, tap into interagency processes and put in play the full force of the US government to focus on a specific set of problems? Well, one example, which we're seeing in real time, is, this Latin America focused anti-corruption squad of the FBI that was set up in Miami a few years back. And, for some time, the stated focus was Mexico, Colombia, and Brazil for its investigative activities. What this new development means is we can expect that FBI agents will be focused on the region as well. So that's one of many examples of the implications of such policy changes in the US government. But like you, Alejandra, and like our participants, I'm interested in Juan Carlos, Jose, and Vanessa's views on, will this happen? Do your governments, do local governments, are they open to that cooperation?
Juan Carlos, you want to lead us off?
Yeah, I believe Costa Rica case is kind of different, because I believe that given the current circumstances, the government needs to show an image that they are open to get cooperation from our main business partner, which is the US. So I believe that they have to be very open to that cooperation. I also understand that we are getting to our electional year, so we are going to vote for president early next year, which also means that I don't expect the government taking any step against the U.S. cooperation at this point. It won't be popular, and I believe that even though the Biden communication or the DOJ communication wasn't including Costa Rica at that time, I believe that now that we have this specific case, I can also see some more focus of the U.S. in Costa Rica and maybe cooperating for a broader investigation locally. Okay. So I believe that this might be the tip of the iceberg so far.
Okay, we'll revisit it in a couple of years, Juan Carlos, and test that. How about you, Vanessa? What's your prediction?
Yeah, well, I do think that it's definitely something that we are going to work together. And I'm going to go back to something that Jose said, like, this must be, something that should be worked together, because I think one very important point that we need to take in consideration is that they're focusing on migration issues too. And that's, that's a big issue for the whole Northern Triangle. So, and that's something that they really want to work on, because it's a problem for all of us. And of course, for the United States too, but they go through Guatemala, they go, they have to go through Mexico. So I think it's gonna make our countries work together. And I do think they're willing to do it, and just to address particularly, all these migration issues, and together with that, of course, all that other type of, anti-corruption issues that come with that.
That's a great point. I mean, there are imminent issues here that are driving these discussions and focus as well. Jose, your view on the likelihood of cooperation between Guatemala and the U.S.?
I did mention there to that question is that it's already happening. I think if there's a special prosecutor's office in Guatemala handling these international cases, there's something you can look up in the web. There's a Ponzi scheme called the Airbit Club, where many monies were flew out of the Eastern European countries into Central American countries, for example, and there's immense cooperation between the Department of Justice and the Guatemalan prosecutor's office. So that's already happening. Out of the memo, what I can see is that's just going to strengthen. It is definitely a potential risk for companies, but it's also an opportunity. It's an opportunity to actually strengthen their governance and anti-corruption efforts, and just stand out. I think companies that will hold formal and real protection issues in their programs, in their compliance programs, they will stand out. But going back to cooperation, I think it's here, and it will only get stronger. And I would say that I would advise people to be aware that that's happening, and that they need to be aware of who they're doing business with.
Yep. No, I think that's all aligned, and not surprisingly that we will see an uptick here. There's one last question, and I think, Vanessa, this one goes to you. Any comments in El Salvador's president's recent decision of adopting Bitcoin as legal tender in that country? It's his understanding that this may avoid using the banking system. That's been the point of contact in the American jurisdiction in money laundering cases all over the world. I think we might have a new panel, Matt. To put together there, because that's certainly ripe for a lot of discussion. But Vanessa, any preliminary reactions or impressions there?
Of course, it's something new, and that poses a change, and of course certain uncertainty. Mm-hmm. But I must say that the CABE, the Central American Bank for Economic Integration, his president has already issued a communication saying that they will help in the implementation of the necessary laws for the Bitcoin. And even though, then again, this poses some uncertainty regarding, all the issues, why it wasn't, openly accepted in other countries. At least I think that, that Central American Bank saying that they will help with its implementation gives, certain legal respaldo, to whatever they're doing with Bitcoin.
Great, thank you. Any other comments, Matt? I think I saw you.
Yeah, sure. Just one final, maybe the takeaways for me and the lessons for the compliance professionals of multilateral, multinational companies doing business in Central America. I think the takeaways are threefold. First, there's a greater likelihood that issues on the ground in Central America will be detected by FCPA authorities in the United States for the reasons we've discussed. Second, there's a real possibility of coordination between U.S. authorities and local authorities, which is somewhat of a surprise to me, but it is encouraging to hear. And then third, also the reflections that in Central America we're dealing with business communities that are more inclined toward anti-corruption compliance than perhaps in prior years, again, which is a good thing for multinational companies doing business there, because it means they're not implementing these compliance practices in a vacuum. So very valuable insights, and thank you to the other panelists.
Thank you, Matt. Any other key takeaways from our other panelists? Jose?
I would just close saying that, as Matt mentioned, that there is, I would leave it with a positive message. We're accustomed to relying solely on the legal system. I think the business community needs to come out of this stronger, just realizing that there's best practices to implement, and that there's risk in dealing with companies that are not formalized or do not stand out to the level that people need to be aware of. So I think that that will raise the bar. That's going to be the example. Even if our legal systems are enforcement-wise are not up to the standards, I think the business community will step up, at least in the majority. Probably not everybody, but in the majority will step up and will create a better business climate.
Thank you. Vanessa?
Yeah, I do want to say that I completely agree. Like, I mean, I know I focused a little bit on the business perspective regarding all this, but there's a lot that we are doing like locally for companies. Like it's very customary, which was not like some years ago. Like do the due diligence for third parties and just have anti-corruption training. All companies do have that. So, I mean, there's ways in which you can tackle all these issues.
That's great. Now that integration is important. Juan Carlos, your closing thoughts?
Nope. Just thank you, and I believe we've covered all, and there's a lot to cover in the next one.
Yes,
Looking
there
forward to it.
is. We look forward to that as well. I cannot thank you enough for your participation, both for our panelists. Your insights are always invaluable and appreciated. I think there will be a sequel, Juan Carlos, and to our participants for taking your time this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you are, again, to join us and for indulging us and going over a few minutes. But hopefully you did find that valuable, and we look forward to speaking again.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.